Are you looking to up your real estate investing game? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Sub 2 Deals Show with your host, Sub 2 expert William Tingle.
Hey Sub 2ers, this is William Tingle of sub2deals.com, welcoming you to this episode of the Sub 2 Deals Show, where we talk about everything subject to and a few other things real estate related that can help you with your business. Today's episode is on how to explain the Sub 2 process to sellers. We had a request for that at our Sub 2 Deals Show Facebook page. So today we're going to cover that. Let me start by saying that we don't really want to do too much explaining to a seller about subject to. What I find a lot of times with creative real estate deals is that we do too much explaining to sellers, especially on details that don't really involve them, things that they really don't care about knowing. If you go to a doctor with some kind of issue, and he says, "Hey, I've got to do a procedure." Do you really care what instruments that he uses? What you really care about is how what he's going to do solves the issue that you have. So too much information a lot of time really confuses people. What you've got to understand is, well, first of all, there's so many investors who don't really have a clear understanding of subject to. Imagine, virtually every seller out there doesn't really know what it involves. So really what you want to do is talk to your seller, find out about their situation, about their house, get the information that you need with regard to how much they owe on the house, the financing that they've got on it, and all those important details that let you make a decision on whether or not you want to pursue it. And then just say something like, "Hey, listen, it sounds like your house might fit a program we've got where we make the payments for you until we can find a buyer. Do you think that might work?" Something like that. I mean, it really tells them about subject to without going into a lot of details. I mean, you could go into a lot of detail and talk about, "Well, Mr. Seller, we'll take over the payments on your house subject to the existing financing. We'll place the title of the property in a land trust, and we're going to do that to avoid the due on sale clause." You see where I'm going with this? It's a lot of information, a lot that they won't understand, and a confused mind almost always says no. So if you present it in just a very common sense, sort of easy to understand way without a lot of terms that really aren't necessary. So really, with regard to how to explain subject to a seller, that's really the way you want to go with it. You just want to keep things simple and just really offer the solution. Yeah, if you're dealing with somebody that's bought a second house and they have to move and they haven't sold this one and they can't make two house payments, but they don't have a tremendous amount of equity, maybe they were going to have to come out of pocket to sell with an agent, would offering to take over the payments work for them? Well, absolutely it would. Now, certainly they may have some questions, and that's really what we're going to talk about today, is the most frequently asked questions by sellers when you present taking over the payments. What are their concerns? What are they asking? And we're going to go over the most frequently asked questions, the questions that we get most of the time, and really just how we answer those questions. So that's what we're going to really talk about today. Now, it's my opinion that building rapport and getting your seller to really feel comfortable with you is the biggest step toward overcoming any fears or questions they may have. And this is a lot easier to do when you're working locally. And you guys have the opportunity, if you're working in one market, you can go out there, make an appointment, sit down with a seller, and it's really a lot easier. Now, when you try to do this solely over the phone, like I do, or even by Zoom or some kind of video conferencing thing, it can be a little bit more difficult. But when you're sitting right there in the living room with the seller, if you're just genuine and honest with them and answering their questions, that's going to really go a long way in that seller feeling comfortable with you and comfortable enough to let them take over payments on financing where technically they're still on the hook for it. So that's really what you want to do. Now, whether your sellers are sophisticated or not, you know, some of them are going to have a few questions, and you need to be able to answer those in a way that's going to satisfy them. And, the key to that is really understanding your business, understanding what you're presenting to them, understanding how subject to works, and having confidence in what you do as being the best solution for this particular seller. Now, the biggest edge you can give yourself after having the seller like you is just being confident about what you're doing and how you're doing it. Now, I know this may be hard at first, especially if you're just getting started, but the key to that is just being as knowledgeable as you can be about subject to, know the mechanics, know how it works, and you really should be fine with it. Just show confidence in yourself and your business. And remember, the sellers, these people are trusting you to help them out, a lot of times in a bad situation. And the house was probably the biggest investment they've ever made. Now, while it may be easier to deal with sellers who are several months behind on payments or already have credit that's shot, there are going to be cases where you're dealing with sellers that have great credit and they're not behind on their payments. And those particular sellers, they're more likely to be the ones that have some questions, and rightly so. Um, so anyway, just remember those points. Now, so what are some of the most frequently asked seller questions we get? Number one, how do I know that you'll make the payments? And how do they know? I mean, you've presented subject to them in a way, like I said earlier, hey, if we could start making the payments for you until we find a buyer, would that work? And they say, well, yeah, that probably would work, but how do I know you'll make those payments? And my response has always been something along the lines of, well, this is our business and this is the way we buy most all of our properties. Now, we wouldn't jeopardize our reputation by not making the payments as we agreed. Now, we don't get paid until we actually cash this loan out. So you better believe that we're working hard toward that the full time we're making the payments. Now, if you like, your lender has an 800 number or perhaps a website, and you can certainly check that every month to make sure the payment's been made as agreed. If there are any problems, you'll know right away. Now, if you have a good credit, you may want to take along a copy of your credit report to show the seller that you have a good payment history. Just let them take a look. You're not going to leave a copy with them or anything like that. And you can also take along a list of references. These are good things to do if you're just getting started out. The more professional references you have, the better. If you know attorneys, doctors, politicians, anyone in your community that everyone knows, that's really good to have on your list because people are just impressed by those things. No matter if they're really impressive people or not, those initials after their name always looks good for you. Now, after you've done a few deals, you can take reference letters, and you always want to get those from people that you buy their houses. When we close with those things, I actually have them handwrite a reference letter for us right there at the closing table. Now, former sellers who write, glowing letters of recommendation are great ways to put a potential seller's mind at ease when you've got a bunch of those. So that's how we handle that. Now, the next question that we get a lot is, what if we decide to buy another home? What happens? I mean, this loan is going to be out there, and if we go to try to buy a new house, what's going to happen? And our answer to that is usually something like, well, if you decide to buy another home, we will provide you with any documentation that your lender requests to help you qualify. Cancel checks, a closing statement, from our closing, whatever you need to satisfy the lender that you're not responsible for the payments anymore and that we're making them, we'll provide that for you. Now, let me caution you on this. I actually saw a teacher recommend this week in a Facebook group, that on a house that you buy subject to, if your seller is trying to buy a new house within a short period of time and they can't do it and they need a lease, to fill out a lease and give them that. Absolutely not. Do not falsify any documents to give to that seller. I have had mortgage brokers call us after we've bought a house from a seller saying, hey, Joe's in here trying to buy a new house, and we need some documentation from you showing, that the payments are covered. A lease would really be good. And I said, well, I can't give you a lease because we're not leasing the house from Joe. We bought it. Now, if you'd like a copy of the HUD from the closing, if you would like a copy of canceled checks or bank statements showing the payments have been made, we'll be glad to give you those. But we can't give you a lease because we're not leasing. So don't ever falsify documents. Provide the seller with what they need that conforms to the type deal that you did with them, but don't falsify documents. Now, whether or not they're going to be buying another home soon is probably something you should try to find out during the process of buying the house from them that you take over the payments on. If your seller's planning on buying another home soon, you should let them know that may be difficult to do for 12 months or so. Unless they have excellent credit and their debt to income is great. Exception to this is if the seller is already qualified for another house and the sale of the existing one is not a condition of the loan closing. So most times this will be a non-issue, as a large percentage of the sellers you'll be dealing with are going to have credit issues. They're either in bankruptcy or have been in bankruptcy or perhaps in foreclosure. Now, for the ones that do not fall in that category, you need to make sure you tell them about any potential difficulties that they may have in qualifying. So the next question we get is, well, how long will it take you to sell the house? And let me start out by saying, the current business model that I use, we try very hard to get the people that we put in the house are refinanced within 36 months or 3 years. I mean, that's the model that we use, and we're successful with that. Well, right now we're running 84% on getting that done. So a very high percentage. Most all of the people that we put in the houses we take over subject to are going to get refinanced in within 3 years. But there are a few that obviously don't. So never give your seller a time frame. And the reason I say that is because if I say, well, Mr. Seller, most of our buyers will be able to cash out your loan within 3 years. When 3 years come and go and the seller calls and says, hey, it's been 3 years, why hasn't the loan been paid off? All they're going to remember is that I said 3 years. They're not going to remember that I said, well, we try, or most of the time, or we will try to get it done. All they're going to remember is 3 years. And they're going to want to hold me to that. And we just can't do it. We can't make those promises because even though we try to get it done, there are buyers that just don't work to repair their credit. There are buyers that decide they don't want to buy the house. There are buyers that get divorces. I mean, life just happens, and you just can't make those promises. So what we do say is, well, Mr. Seller, we can't give you an exact time frame for the loan being paid off. We may get a buyer that can refinance within 30 days, or the loan may go full term. While we can't guarantee exactly when it will cash out, what we can guarantee is that the payments will be made on time, every single month, for as long as we have the property. If the first buyer we put in doesn't pay and moves out, we're going to keep making those payments and look for a second buyer and keep going until we get this thing done. Remember, Mr. Seller, we do not get paid until this loan gets retired and the house gets sold. So we are constantly working on getting this completed. Remember, never promise your seller a specific time to cash out. This is just something you cannot control, and unless you're prepared to pay it off yourself, don't make that promise. Okay? Don't let your seller base their future plans on promises you made that you can't keep. So the next question that we get, well, what if the person you put in the house tears it up or doesn't pay? And, sometimes sellers worry about this thing. They worry about getting a house back that may be destroyed or torn up. And the response to that is, well, the people we put in the homes are people who actually want to own it, not rent it. And as such, the chances of them tearing it up is much less likely than with a regular tenant. We're not actually going to be living there, so we can't guarantee they won't tear it up. But we will be responsible if they do. We will repair it as promised. And, if we have to file on insurance, we'll do that too. We also cannot guarantee they'll pay us every month, but we guarantee we'll make the payments on the house, and we're willing to put that in writing. So what really understand with these questions, people are just trying to get just some assurance. They just want to not be worried about things going forward. And if you can answer these questions, that's really all they want. Okay. So the next question, well, how do we know that you'll do as agreed? How can we trust you? And my answer to that is always, Mr. Seller, this is our business. This is what we do. We know this business. We're confident that we can offer you the best solution right now. Ultimately, you have to feel at peace about your decision to sell to us. And frankly, if you don't feel at ease with it, we really don't want to do business. If you can't sign the papers and sleep well tonight, then we just need to part as friends. Wish you the best of luck in selling your house. Now, remember, answer their questions honestly and don't make promises you can't keep. These are just people who, in some cases, have a financial circumstance that, forces them to make some scary decisions. And it's possible for you to help them out and make a profit. The last question on our list for today, is when they ask, what happens if you don't pay? What'll happen to my credit? And, my answer, when I tell most people what my answer is and other investors, they seem shocked. But my answer to that question is always, well, Mr. Seller, if I don't make the payments, your credit is toast. Because that's a fact. If I take over payments for someone's loan and I don't make the payments, their credit is the one that gets harmed, not mine. And if I don't make the payments long enough, the bank will foreclose on the house. And then there's a foreclosure on that seller's credit report. So, we know what that means. So I'm very honest, I'm very upfront, and I think sellers really appreciate that. Just remember, answer their questions honestly, okay? When your sellers do have questions, and some of them will, now some will never ask you a question, but when you do get those sellers that have questions, just be as honest, answer as simply and as straightforwardly as possible. Don't use a lot of words or terms that they may not understand. Subject to, they're not going to have a clue what you're talking about. Equitable interest, land trusts, all those things. They just want to understand it, and they really don't need to know. There are simple ways to explain it, and we've talked about that. Use words and terms that are simple to understand. Okay, so that's really how it works. That's how you deal with sellers on explaining subject to, how to answer some of the most commonly asked questions that you'll get. And believe me, we're working on 600 transactions over the last 20 years. And if any seller that you run into asks you all 6 of these questions, they are really grilling you. It is rare. It is very rare for anything like that to happen. So I hope this helps. I hope this helps you in dealing with sellers and how to explain subject to as such. If you have any other questions, you can contact me at william@sub2deals.com. You can find us on Facebook at our Subject To Facebook group. You can go directly to our URL at sub2forum.com, and you can find us at sub2deals.com. So you guys have a great day and get out there and buy some houses.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Sub2 Deals Show with William Tingle. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And for more great content and to stay up to date, visit sub2deals.com, on Facebook at Sub2 Deals. We'll catch you next time.